Hey, soul surfers, welcome back to Waves of Consciousness with My Spiritual Ocean. My name is Alicia. Today we are writing the Law of Assumption wave, and we are talking about everyone and everything is you pushed out. So let's go ahead and dive on in. As a theater kid, I had heard the Shakespeare quote, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players," or other common phrases such as "forgive them, they know not what they do," or "as within, so without." But I never really questioned what these phrases meant and kind of took them for what they were, not realizing that there was an underlying spiritual truth to them, and that is that everyone and everything is you pushed out. I really like the way Neville Goddard explains this, so I'm going to share a couple of quotes from him about this. If you're not familiar with Neville Goddard, he is a spiritualist and mystic that's very well known in the spiritual manifestation community. His work really focuses on a new perspective of the Bible and the way the Bible was really meant to be interpreted, but he has other great topics and ideas and quotes outside of that. So if you're interested, I highly, highly recommend his work. But here are the quotes that he has given on this topic of everyone is you pushed out. The first one is, "The whole vast world is yourself pushed out." And with regard to this, he advises, "Change your conception of yourself and you will automatically change the world in which you live. Do not try to change people. They are only messengers telling you who you are. Revalue yourself and they will confirm the change." This concept of everyone is you pushed out really transformed everything for me when I finally understood it. And it was actually probably one of the most powerful concepts once I fully grasped what it meant and how it worked. But at first it really confused me because I took it quite literal. So when I heard that everyone is you pushed out, I thought that that meant everyone was directly reflecting an aspect of me. Like, in the sense that basically saying that anything I saw in another, I figured I must have assumed to be true about myself. And I'll give an example because everything is reflecting an aspect of you, but not in the way that I was confused about it at first. So, for example, at one point I asked myself if someone was showing up as a narcissist in my experience, does that mean I'm a narcissist? For the purposes of this topic, the simple answer is no. It wasn't showing that I believed I was a narcissist, but it did show me what I believe to be true about myself and others in terms of relationships. Now, I don't like labels because I personally believe that they are just a way to create division and also deflect from what really needs to be focused on. But just for the sake of discussion, if you're someone who routinely has experienced narcissists in your past or is experiencing them now, it's typically a reflection of your desire to give love and prove your worth. And a lot of times those people who are involved with narcissists are accepting of breadcrumbs. So in the typical dynamic where a narcissist is present, a narcissist takes and takes and takes and doesn't give, and the other person gives and gives and gives with not receiving much in return. But all of that aside, what this is really actually reflecting to you, and this is where the focus needs to be, is what's being shown to you, is that you have this core belief of you are not good enough. And there may be other beliefs coupled in there too, but that's really kind of the core belief. Anyway, after I went through this whole experience of really understanding that because someone was showing up a certain way, that didn't mean that that's what I believed about myself, label-wise, but it was showing me something about myself, especially depending on how I was showing up in that connection. So what I finally realized was that everyone is you pushed out didn't mean it was a direct reflection of exactly who I assumed myself to be, as in a label, but it was more reflecting back that everyone and everything was mirroring my thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions about myself and the world. So, in other words, they were reflecting back my self-concept. Once I pieced this together, I started to take an inventory and reflect back on my life, and I really was able to see just how people had always been playing the role that I had given them based on my assumptions. So if you're someone who finds yourself routinely asking, why does this keep happening to me? Or why are the people I'm with always this way? Kind of like, almost like you're experiencing the same person at the core, but just with a different face. then it may be helpful to start asking yourself, what do I believe about myself or this area of life that is being reflected back to me? Because once you begin to identify the core beliefs and assumptions that are being reflected back to you, you can begin to shift these beliefs and then your experience will change. That's the true meaning of as within, so without. Everything that's going on within you is being reflected outward. And a lot of people think that what's going on out here, and they're using whatever's going on in their experience to solidify their beliefs about themselves, not knowing that it's quite the opposite. Nothing out here in your experience can change until you change the way that you show up in your experience and what you believe about yourself and about different areas of life. I will say to start taking note of your triggers, because the things that trigger you most deeply are the biggest reflectors of active unfavorable beliefs about yourself. So when you feel triggered by something, you can ask yourself, what is it about this that is triggering me? What do I believe to be true about myself that's being activated within through this trigger? This is really how you master your reality, is you start using it as feedback instead of using it as fact and truth to solidify any beliefs that you have. If you do that, you're going to stay in repeated cycles. As I started to grasp this concept more fully and really understand and get to that reflective part of my experience, I looked back on my past experiences with people and in different scenarios and situations, and I realized pretty much every single one mirrored the relationship I had with my parents as a child. Not just the relationship I had with them, but also the messages that I internalized or the faulty assumptions about myself that I had made based on how I was being treated by those I loved in childhood. I was also unconsciously playing out that role in my life and then choosing people to fulfill that role as well. So those people were showing up based on my assumptions about whatever area of life it was. And if you do this and you look back, especially if there's a pattern for you, you may notice that a lot of these beliefs go all the way back to childhood and do actually reflect or mirror aspects of the relationships or treatment you received in childhood. It may also be the assumptions you made based on what you observed from your parents, and not just parents. This can also be school, peers, media, all sorts of messages like that. That's where we make our assumptions, our connections, and we also internalize those things about ourselves. Now, this concept of everyone is you pushed out can be a very challenging concept for many people. Why is that? Well, first off, we are taught that everything is separate from us, but the truth is we are one, and you've probably heard that saying before. We are one, unity consciousness, etc., etc. Nothing is separate. We all come from the same source energy. Some people call it God, some people call it source, some call it spirit. There's all different names for it, but we all come from that same energy source. So we're all fractals of it, and we're all reflecting each other in this experience. So nothing is really truly separate from us. Everything started from within. It started with our belief systems. It started with the things that we learned, and then we started living based on those messages that we received, as well as the assumptions that we made about ourselves and the world around us. And you may even notice in society, a lot of things, almost everything, although I think this is shifting, is very other focused. It's focused on other people. People don't have the capacity to fully reflect inward and understand that everything that's going on around them is based on the way they're showing up, the beliefs that they hold. And most of these beliefs are unconscious beliefs. That's why as you're bringing consciousness or awareness to what's going on around you, you can start to notice the patterns, notice the beliefs, and start to shift them and make different choices or assumptions. The second reason I feel like this is a challenging concept for most people is because it requires a deep level of accountability, responsibility, and honesty and ownership for yourself and your experience. And I think a lot of us are taught that it's just easier if other people change. If other people change, then I will feel better. If other people change, it will prove that this is not true. But we're the ones in charge. Everything is being reflected back based on our assumptions, and that is the way that the world works. There's no other way to change things around you. Most people fall in a pattern of control, and they try to control everything outside of them because they I don't want to say like lack self-control, but they don't understand the way things work, and they don't understand the assumptions that they're holding and how everything really does start within and it's reflected out. We're so tied to the 3D world, to the reality as the cold, hard truth, not realizing and understanding that we're the power that's the driving force around what's going on outside of us. When you're in this state of control and you're trying to change everything outside of you, it feels exhausting. That is why most people come into spirituality and learn the ways of the world by hitting a rock bottom. Now, not everyone goes through this, but most people, they're trying to maintain some sense of control in their life. So they're controlling how people view them by showing up a certain way. They are not being their authentic selves. There's a lot of people pleasing that goes on. That's a form of control, trying to make people like you through your behaviors and actions. But if you notice, when we talk about these things, there's only one common denominator in all of it, and that is you. So the thing that needs to change is you. And I don't mean change in the sense like there's anything wrong with you. And that's where sometimes I think it's challenging with this concept as well, is because you hear you don't need to change, you don't have to do anything, you're wonderful the way you are, which is true. But a lot of people are operating from these masks, these false self masks that are really hiding who they really are. So it's not so much about changing who you are as allowing yourself to be who you are, and not making your decisions in life and assumptions in life based on what other people are going to think of you or how they're going to respond. Because all you really need to do is change the story of yourself, how you view yourself, how you show up for yourself. When you do that, everything around you starts changing. It starts responding, and things become more easy and effortless for you. When you're in a state of control, things feel challenging, they feel exhausting. And that's why I think people become very burnt out and do hit this rock bottom, because they're exhausted of trying to control and change everything around them, because it doesn't work. Now, if you're in a state of control, sometimes you may notice temporary changes. Things may go good for a little while, but since the core concepts of yourself haven't changed, things will go back to the way that they were. This is why people can tend to stay in toxic patterns and toxic cycles, because they're expecting everything around them to change, not realizing the world is responding to and reflecting their true assumptions and beliefs about themselves. So if you stay in a cycle of continuously thinking that others need to change, that's what's going to keep you in repeated cycles and patterns of not feeling very good, or things being kind of hot and cold, or really good and then really bad. Continuously thinking that others need to change is going to keep you in repeated cycles and patterns, because everyone and everything is you pushed out. So until you change your core beliefs and start showing up for yourself differently and showing up in your experience differently, things are not going to change. Now, how can the concept of everyone is you pushed out help you and benefit you? It's actually a really great concept. At first, it might not feel so great, but when you realize the truth of it, you can work it to your benefit, which is really wonderful. So here are some ways that the concept of everyone you pushed out benefits you. The first one is that you can finally break patterns and cycles that don't feel good or are unfavorable. You can also be yourself and live freely without trying to have to control how you show up, or control how you feel, or control other people around you to get what you want in life. It really just makes things feel easy and effortless, because you're not living by someone else's standards, you're living by your own standards. And finally, this is the best one in my opinion. Since the world is reflecting you, you have the power to change anything at any time just by changing your assumptions of yourself and the world. Sometimes this takes time. I know a lot of times we want this to be an overnight process because we want to feel better now. But when you're shifting how you view yourself, especially if you've been living with assumptions and beliefs about yourself and they feel really real based on all the things you've experienced, it does take time to shift that, okay? So persistence is key. The more you consistently and persistently show up for yourself in the ways that you want everyone else to, things will happen, they will unfold, and you will change and transform your experience. You can also experience different versions of people as well. So if someone's showing up in your experience and you don't like the way they're showing up, what most people try to do is try to change the experience out in the reality. They try to control what the person does, how they show up. But again, if your core assumption is you're not good enough or not lovable or insert whatever it may be, that's going to be reflected back to you no matter how hard you try to get the other person to change. So when you take the time to step back and see how this person's responding to you and ask yourself what's being reflected back, you can change that assumption, and then the world changes around you as well. That's the way it works. It has to respond to reflect this change. Remember what Neville Goddard said. People are just messengers. Don't try to change them. Change yourself, and they will come back and show you evidence of your new belief systems. What I will say about changing and experiencing a different version of somebody is that it really does start with self. When you can change the story of somebody else all you want, but if you have not dealt with the core self-concept beliefs that are really the true cause of how someone's showing up in your experience, then that change is going to be short-lived. So I always recommend self-concept work, going within, changing the story of you, because then it's just easier to change the way you view other people also. So in order to experience a new version of someone else, you do have to drop the old story of them too and any past experiences. But again, when you go through and do the inner transformation work and look at the core beliefs that are being reflected back to you, it's easy to change the story of somebody. Something very magical happens when you grasp this concept of everyone as you pushed out and you start using your experiences with other people as feedback of where you're at and what you believe to be true. And you can really take it and transform your life and work it in your favor. So I challenge you, knowing what you've learned today, take a look back at your past experiences and even where you're at right now with different people in your life and any scenarios that you're in. And start asking yourself, what is this showing me about me? What beliefs do I hold about myself? And what beliefs am I solidifying in myself by using what I'm experiencing as truth? Because when you get to the core of that, you can change those beliefs and assumptions about yourself and the world, and magically, everything around you will transform. You can really let the concept of everyone as you pushed out work in your favor. That's all the time we have today. Thank you for joining me. I will catch you all on the next wave.